Hi, welcome to Storytime. I'm Kimberlyn with Life's Work Yoga, and Storytime is honestly just an opportunity to connect, to share with you some of the concepts and the ideas and the practices of what I call yoga living, meaning that life is rich with opportunity to practice living our best lives, practice showing up authentically, showing up to be with each other, but to show up as who we truly are. Now, I'm talking a lot this month about play. And so it's not directly play that I want to address in today's story time, but help you understand how story time fits into the broader practice of yoga living. See, I do this live broadcast once a week to share stories, examples, and snippets of living the practices. In fact, there's essentially 10 practices that cultivate, and that word's going to be key for today, that cultivate the discipline or the habits of living intimately with inspiration. You might also call that living intimately with prana. That's what I mean. And inspiration is about feeling the feelings, the emotions of happiness and joy. Now, on Wednesdays then, I do a teaching circle, a group conversation, group dialogue, where I teach how to live according to the practices and the principles that I share stories about on Storytime. But it's within the Yoga Living Immersion program where I'm going to help you apply these practices and principles into what matters most for you, into your daily living. So let me tell you about Reframe from Love, which is a concept that actually was born in the conversation, at least in its naming. I have been doing the practice for decades as a way to help regulate my own relationship with emotions and my relationship with the argument that this brain was having with reality. In other words, when I didn't like what the world was offering, this brain felt that imbalance, that discomfort, that argument of sorts. But the practice of yoga living helped me to awaken the alignment of the intellectual, logical brain in the head, the emotional, storytelling brain of the one that lives in the heart, and the intuitive, the grounding energy of just knowing from our core, from our root, from our sense of well-being, the oneness that is, in fact, the yoga. Now, when we connect these three practices of the mind, the heart, and the belly, these three manas, mana, maya, kosha, meaning the mind stuff, it helps us to see from a broader perspective. Now, why does this matter in terms of reframing from love? Well, it matters because if I only use one of these perspectives, I tend to get a skewed perspective. I tend to get a skewed story, right? Mind, looking at logic, looking at ways to protect me. Heart, looking at ways to avoid pain. This is where attachment and aversion comes in from the yoga principles. So the idea is not necessarily to ignore the mind stuff. This is meant to help us survive. That's what the brain is hardwired to do. But when we cultivate this idea of reframing from love, it kind of gives us this pause, this suspension of reaction long enough to link brain, heart, and belly so that we can have clearer thinking and clearer feeling. Now, for decades, I have been using this practice personally and have been hesitant to share it because I was taught that we can't control our feelings. This is where this story becomes live today. And that is in this morning, my reading of the news, which happens through my phone to NPR, National Public Radio. So this article that is entitled, let's see if I can find the title, Stuck in a Rut? Sometimes Joy Takes a Little Practice. I love this title. it speaks directly to the work that I'm doing in my life, which is habits, these daily practices. They're not about perfection. They're not about performance. They're about doing things awkwardly until, through that repetition of practice, we gain confidence. That's a heart issue. And we gain competence, which is a knowledge or a skill-based, connecting our body and our mind. So what does that mean? This article, right, validated and affirmed me in a way that I didn't even know that I really needed today. But it says how emotions arise. I'm going to read this directly to you. For thousands of years, there's been a common belief in Western culture about emotions, that they are hardwired and reflexive. Psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett writes in the book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. When something happens in the world, our emotions come on fast and uncontrollable, as if somebody flipped a switch, she writes. But when researchers look at what's going on inside the brain and inside the body during specific emotional states, this theory doesn't hold up. Over the past decade, neuroscientists have begun to shift how they think emotions arise. Rather than being inevitable, hard-coded experiences, researchers now think emotions are malleable, and people have more influence over them than previously thought. What does this mean? This means that the practice of Reframe from Love, that literally was coined in the conversation with a client about how their worldview, how their perspective was focusing on lack, focusing on what was not, and the disagreement between what they wanted and reality. In other words, this argument that happens kind of between the world of reality and our interpretation inside this dialogue of the brain, the heart, and the belly. So what does that mean? It means that we have to cultivate, we have to practice pulling apart these inner workings of sensory data and our emotional interpretation, or our digestion of that data. Data has no positive or negative, it just is. But as soon as it comes inside the body, we have a response to it. That's the purpose of our autonomic nervous system. However, our autonomic nervous system can also be influenced by the choices we make, by the practices we repeat. As we practice them in safe space, meaning practice, that's what meditation, that's what mindfulness is all about, is finding ways in which to do the thing that we want to do more skillfully with confidence and competence, even when we don't have to think about it. That starts by doing the practice in the moment, when we set up a safe place and we show up authentically to say, today I'm going to cultivate, fill in the blank. Focusing on an emotion might just be the beginnings of having more intimacy, more supple access to that emotion. Think about it this way. When you make a drive to a familiar place, the first time it's awkward and uncomfortable, and you probably have to even have Google or whoever Siri talk you through every turn of that drive. But as you get more comfortable and more fluent, you need less of Siri and more of your internal direction. So much so, when you get really confident and competent in this drive, you know when and where and how to avoid some of the big traffic obstructions. Maybe even to work around construction or other things that might get in your way and slow down your path. You've got a broader application of the knowledge, the specific knowledge of getting from point A to point B. This is the same thing that happens when it comes to cultivating our skill of feeling, 2 layers of feeling, first of which is through our senses, right? Our smell, our taste, our touch, our sound, and the other one, whatever it is. And then interpreting those senses, those data, so that we can apply it. And this is where we cultivate that reframing. We choose to focus on what brings us hope, what is positive. This is not a denial or ignoring of what is hard or out of balance. It just means that focusing on the lack isn't going to bring us into that spaciousness, that healthy optimism of hope, where we can choose actions that move us toward the reality that we want to cultivate. Now, here's the catch here. This is what I really wanted to share with you, in the sense that I didn't know that I needed this validation. And in fact, I didn't need this validation from an external source. But that doesn't mean that an external source affirming, confirming, and validating what I have known from my personal experience, what I have been teaching in my personal practice, wasn't desired, wasn't appreciated. Here's the catch, right? When we go looking for that external validation, it deters us from feeling our own experience. And if yoga is anything, it is about cultivating our personal experience, cultivating permission to trust what is coming in, not to the exclusion of other things. And that's where we have to hold our practice tenderly, gently, to allow for it to ebb and flow. Because, as we know, nothing lasts save eternal change. In other words, everything is in transition. Everything is changing. Nothing is permanent. So even what I think I know may change as I continue to stay open to experiencing, to learning, to connecting in new ways. That's not to say that I live in shame for what I used to believe. Not at all. It means that I am able to let go of that freely and embrace the newness of what is being presented, because I cultivate this compassion for the journey first. That's ahimsa, followed by the truth-seeking, the satya, right? That we want to cultivate a deepening a relationship, an unfolding. Hence, we have to practice being with that tender space until it becomes more confident. So, what does that mean? It means trust your experience. In order to trust your experience, you need to have a lot of experience. So it's familiar, so that it becomes something that you can count on. And yet, in that space of trusting your experience, you gotta keep yourself open to the possibility that your experience is being influenced unnecessarily by expectation. In yoga, we would call that attachments, right? In the sense that once we get attached to something, we may not see, feel, hear, taste, smell the other things that are contrary or in competition with that focus. Focus is our friend, and yet it has to be balanced by the overall awareness. So, if you want to learn how to cultivate this permission to disconnect your reactions to the data that's coming in through your senses, if you want to help reframe your head, your brain, your heart, your belly, to reframe from a point of love, a place of trust and abundance, this is the practice of yoga living. This, my friends, is my life's work, my dharma, to help all of us live more intimately with inspiration, with love, and connection. Thanks for letting me share this story. Be well, take care of you, we take care of each other, and we might just live with a little more ease. Breathe deeply, move freely, labor lovingly, and live vibrantly. Namaste, and I hope to see you in real time, real soon. Bye for now.